All right, everybody, morning. Hope you all are doing well. Thanks so much for all your hard work that you've put in so far. I've really enjoyed reading the drafts of your future worlds. Just a quick reminder on the future worlds. You are welcome to create a world in which you explore slash develop more broadly the work that you did in your presentation, if that's easiest for you, or you are welcome to start from scratch and then invent a world that responds to a problem of your choice. So again, whichever of those appeals to you most, please pursue that. I'm sorry to do this, but I do not have the bandwidth to hold 15 hours of independent conferences from my house next week. So instead of independent conferences, I am going to host office hours in Canvas web conferences. So as soon as I start those office hours, you will receive an email from Canvas telling you that the hours are open, and then you can drop in. So again, those days will be next Tuesday and Thursday, 9 to 11. And then if more people want to participate, I can do one or more the following week. So again, I apologize for having you guys sign up for that, but it's just not tenable. Okay, so today's video is going to cover a quick overview of Moore's Utopia Book 2. And then we're going to go over some of the example brochure flyers that I posted at the bottom of today's class plan as examples that you are welcome to use in part or parcel for the process document 5 that I would like you to complete, where you produce a brochure or a flyer, whichever best suits your project, to advertise the future world that you are inventing. So I guess just quickly, from its very first publication in 1516, Moore's Utopia was typically published with what this guy Robert Adams calls a garland of humanist testimonials. That is, it's published with the map that we've seen a couple times, this utopian alphabet that Moore invented, and then a bunch of letters that Moore sends to his friends that perpetrate utopia as a kind of hoax. That is to say, Moore and his friends pretend like utopia is a real place, just like a bunch of other texts that were written around the same time, where travelers go to what is now, North, Central, and South America, and then Moore does the same thing. So here he says, a lot of people say, you must have made all that up. And he's like, I didn't make that up. I am not witty enough to make that up. Plus, let's see. Plus, Hythloday is a real guy, and I heard him tell me this whole story. But unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly where Utopia is, because when Hythloday was telling me the story, he coughed, and I couldn't hear exactly where it is. So anyway, this is all to say that Moore himself provides a kind of template for our project. So taken together, these texts provide an antecedent for the kind of advertisement that figures the possibility of reaching the future in the present. To help focus your projects and to explore the elements of this genre, i.e. the utopia, we're going to review the sort of visual, verbal, rhetorical elements of utopia, and then move on to the types of advertising that are prevalent in the contemporary and that I'd like you to work on. Okay, so switching over to Utopia, just quickly, we find out, this is at the end of book 1. Remember, book 1 is in part a diagnosis of problems facing England and then the root or underlying causes of those problems. So remember, poverty is not the consequence of moral failure. It's becoming a thief is not something that you were born into. It is something that you were made into because of, for Hythloday, this sort of central problem becomes private property, right? So it's because of private property that people become bad. We're not born bad, right? So the key underlying problem for Hythloday is, from whence I am persuaded, this is at the very end of the dialogue in book 1, from whence I am persuaded that till private property is taken away, there can be no equitable or just distribution of things, nor can the world be happily governed. For as long as that is maintained, the greatest and the far best part of mankind will still be oppressed with the load of cares and anxieties. Okay, so book 2 then becomes an occasion to redress this key factor that underlies inequality, poverty, violence, etc. Okay, and so how does Hythloday redress this sort of underlying problem? In addition to creating laws that say all property is held in common, he produces changes across a broad array of categories, right? So taking gold as an example, we can say not only is it not legal to own and possess stores of gold, in addition, the society broadly devalues gold by producing a surfeit of it, right? So there's this notion that things are made valuable according to markets that produce value according to scarcity and excess, and that value is arbitrary insofar as the metal itself, right, gold is weaker than iron, right? And so it doesn't have inherent value. It has value assigned arbitrarily by markets. So in addition to producing like a surfeit, right, an excess that will devalue the gold, there's also this kind of clever, how should I put it, interpersonal activity, right? So in addition to these metals being laid up in any tower in the kingdom, it would make people think that it's more valuable than it is. So instead, to prevent all these inconveniences that have fallen upon an expedient which, as it agrees with their other policy, so it's very different from ours, and will scarce gain belief among us who value gold so much and lay it up so carefully. They eat and drink out of vessels of earth or glass, which make an agreeable appearance, while they make their chamber pots and close stools of gold and silver. Okay, so instead of valuing it, they make, right, the chamber pots, toilets out of gold and silver. Additionally, of the same metals they likewise make chains and fetters for their slaves, to some of which, as a badge of infamy, they hang an earring of gold, and make others wear a chain or coronet crown of the same material. And thus they take care by all possible means to render gold and silver of no esteem, and hence it is, while other nations part with their gold and silver as unwillingly as if one tore out their bowels, those of Utopia would look on their giving and all they possess of those metals when there were any use of them, but as the parting with a trifle, or as we would esteem of a penny. And then he tells the story of, so this is Hythloday again telling the story. I never saw a clearer instance of the opposite impression that different customs make on people than I observed in the ambassadors of the Anemorulians who came to Amarat, the capital city. As they came to treat of the affairs of great consequence, the deputies from several towns met together to wait for their coming. The ambassadors of the nations that lie near Utopia, knowing their customs, and that fine clothes are in no esteem among them, that silk is despised and gold is a badge of infamy, used to come very modestly clothed. But the Anemoloians lying more remote and having had little commerce with them, understanding that they were coarsely clothed and in all the same manner, took it for granted that they had none of those fine things among them, of which they made no use. So anyway, the ambassadors come in, they're dressed super fancy, and then a child watching takes them for slaves because they are covered in gold and the type of stuff that children are used to play with. So again, this is all to say, how can you, in the world that you are creating, like More, both change laws or norms, but then at the same time produce creative solutions that change social customs that affect, in this case, certain types of valuation. Okay, the other thing I'm going to say about utopia is if you think about what the different components of the society look like when they're illustrated, that can help you in communicating your ideas in your essay to others, right? So even though More's utopia is, alphanumeric, it's also uniquely visual in its appeal, right? So you can visualize the geography. You can visualize the sets of interpersonal relationships. You can visualize, here's a student drawing of ways in which gold is devalued by producing chamber pots, and then again here, and chains out of valuable material. You can visualize what transportation looks like, not only because of the key descriptions of transportation, but also because we have a clear sense of the geography, etc. All right. So additionally, this is the last thing I'm going to say about utopia. When we read More's utopia, as opposed to illustrating it, like literally illustrating it. If we were in class, I would have you do this activity where you draw everything on the board. And we can say, on the one hand, especially in the first half of book 2, More's utopia is deeply repressive on a material level, right? All women wear the same clothes. All men wear the same clothes. Everybody has to sit in the exact same place, in the exact same dining halls, etc. And so the ways, like the rigor of their material existence definitely is in keeping with like every kind of like movie dystopia you've ever seen, right? It's the same as Handmaid's Tale. It's similar to, I don't know, early parts of like The Giver, etc. So on the one hand, again, sort of the first part of utopia, the material components of utopia are deeply repressive, right? So here's this, here's a illustration of gendered hierarchy, right? And then you get this weird moment where before people get married, they get to look at each other naked, and there's these like rigorous laws pertaining to marriage customs, etc., right? So again, on the one hand, at the material level is super repressive. But once everything is kind of laid out for you in a kind of panorama, and you can kind of see that on the one hand, here's these sort of repressive material rules, but by the time you get to, oops, what's happening? The other end of the spectrum, that is kind of religion or education, what was repressive at the material level opens up onto, and again, this is 1516, a kind of progressive at the level of like the intellectual or the spiritual. So that is to say, even though, for example, there's this weird, in choosing wives, they use a method that would appear to us very absurd and ridiculous, but it's constantly observed among them. And it's performed consistently. This is so the bridegroom gets to see his wife naked, and then later the bride gets to see, her husband, or the husband, to be naked, and this like enforces a pretty strict sense of gender hierarchy. By the time you get to the end of the text, we find out somewhat radically that sometimes women themselves are made priests. I get that it's sort of seldom, and it's not as progressive as sort of like a contemporary, but this is all to say that once the text is illustrated, or in the pursuit of a certain type of illustration, what we see laid out broadly is this idea that the book is trying to communicate. Is it worth sacrificing sort of choice or individual liberty at the level of the material, at the level of gold and silver, at the level of where you get to live, of what you get to wear, if that means a wider set of freedoms at the sort of intellectual, spiritual level, i.e., religion, education, etc. So, all right, there's a million more things I could talk about in Utopia, but I am going to leave it there so that we are not doing this for a million hours, and then move on to the second half of today's activity. So I feel like we spent a lot of time on visual design, because we have, and so just thinking though, again, as a kind of way to retrace our steps, here are sets of advertisements from 3 sort of radically different events or places. You want to think like, I find the Fire Festival kind of hilarious, that here you have the sort of really exciting design on the one hand, right? So again, that's using 2 columns, two columns and 2 rows on one side, 1 row on the other. That sort of promises or hints at what a kind of lifestyle, we get that, here I look into this as if I'm the 4th person in this image that I could just step into, and that the color and the background, the white and black on orange, and then the orange itself became a kind of viral bit of advertising that made a kind of promise of something yet to come, that, of course, was sort of hilariously and kind of tragically fulfilled, because the Fire Festival is nothing like what was promised. It was like a Ponzi scheme. Excuse me. Again, has that, though, how do I put it? That notion, or that, it's an example of figuring the future within the confines of the present. So just like just like some of the movies that we talked about at the beginning of the semester, here is this possible future that happens right now. All right, so here is a Disney cruise brochure. This is on a triptych, because it's the difference between a brochure and a flyer is kind of layout, right? So this one's a bit more of a brochure. It's foldable. That's why it's in triptych. It has a little bit more text, but I think it's interesting that this sort of flyer tropes on the same types of iconography and generic components that we see more even making fun of and parodying in his book that's, a little over 500 years old, right? So here again, holding out the promise of a certain type of adventure, and suggesting the ways in which you can accomplish this kind of, imaginative distance, but like also within the present that you occupy. And then finally, here is this was a digital flyer for a redevelopment project in Atlanta. And so we might say, how does the designer ask the reader to work through, again, double row, I'm sorry, double column, triple row project? What types of choices does the designer make, balancing the visual with the text? And then finally, how do, I guess in all of these, use of sort of color and color saturation help communicate the goal. And then I guess with both more and then also these brochures, to what extent does the promise made by the brochure, that here's this thing that if you come here, or if you come with me, or if you participate in the future, this is what you will get. How does that promise overlook or silence the complexities of the present, right? Might be a thing that you want to think about. So what's lost in the promise? All right, finally, just like everything this semester, you are more than welcome to design your flyer in any tool you would like. We've worked in Canva already, and so you might want to pop back into Canva. Give me 1 second. Because Canva will give you sets of templates that you can work from. So, let's see what I got. Poster, cover, logo, presentation, flyer. So already. Templates. Category. Let's try flyers. And then here we go. All right, and so some of these templates will provide layouts for you that you are welcome to borrow and then design the way you want to. Again, you're also welcome to design from scratch. My one condition for these is I would like for you to use, I think I said at least 4 images, so 2 to 4 images. I'd like the title of the world, and then I would like for it to give the audience some sense of what they could expect if they visited. All right, so just a quick note, this is the final. Your title can be, again, as inventive or creative as you like. If you are expanding on the presentation that you did, you're welcome to just title both the brochure and the project something, zero emission transportation, right? And then again, you're also welcome to use some of the images from your presentation in this part of the project. And here's the last thing that I'm going to say today. If you go to assignments, I'm sorry, and then to new features, you can see sets of student flyers, and then also an example of how you can then set the flyer that you made into the final version of your essay. Also, you're welcome in your final version to use the templates that are available in all sorts of word processing documents, but here's what they look like. So if you want to use a layout template in Google Docs, you go to New, open the doc, and then click over, and then you click from Template, and then that'll give you all these different templates to choose from. So this is the one that I used in the example, but again, there's myriad templates that you can choose from. So say you wanted to use this company newsletter template, you open it up, and then just like any other template, it's drag and drop. And so say you wanted to use this template for the final version of your essay, you can just swap out this image for a JPEG of the brochure or flyer that you designed. So remember, in Canva or whichever of the bits of design software you use, that you want to export the file. Sorry, this is like kind of nutty. Remember that Canva's drag and drop, that you want to export it as no. A JPEG. So, and you usually don't have to, you're not charged for those. All right, you guys, I know that was a lot. Thank you for paying attention through the whole thing. So just final on this. Looking forward to next week. Like I said at the beginning, got drop-in hours, and then there will be, I'll finish grading. I'll work through the rest of the work that you've done in your Google Docs, and post one final video detailing the new features page for the portfolio, and then the composition of the essay and the final portfolio. All right, I know this is long. Thanks.